Hello everyone and welcome to RPGs with Paddy. I'm Paddy. Today we're going to be looking at entry 7 out of 8 for New Game Master Month. That's right, we're almost there. This video will be looking at Trail of Cthulhu with some rules, clarifications, advice and some suggestions for troubleshooting as well. There's quite a bit of reading to go through, so let's get started. So we just get a few things that you might need to prepare for the game, and I'll just go through these briefly. Dice appropriate for your game system. For Trail of Cthulhu, you only need a 6-sided die, but it can be really useful and speed things up to have more than one. Having one per player, and maybe one for yourself for combat, can help keep everything running nice and smoothly. It's also good to have some paper and a pencil. You can use this for taking down notes yourself, or if you need to draw a quick map in a pinch. Blank character sheets are also important. You can find these in the core rulebook or on the Pelgrane Press website. You should print one for each player and have an extra 2 or 3 on hand, just in case. If you think someone might die in your adventure before the conclusion, you can have a few pre-gens ready for them to play. For example, taking on the role of the sheriff, which kind of slots in nicely to the rest of the scenario. But I think that they will probably be fine in this introductory scenario, at least making it to the conclusion, even if they die there. If you're playing with the pre-gens at the back of the book, make sure you print them out on separate sheets to give to the players. The next one is drinks and snacks. So of course this is not necessary, but it's a bit of a tradition and it's always nice. Especially when players are learning a new system, having snacks and drinks on hand can help keep them in a good mood while they're learning new things as well. Kind of like takes off the pressure, gives a more relaxed vibe to it as well. It also says here that you can have extra copies of the core book to hand out to the players rather than having them share the same one back and forth. I would say don't worry about this. I would say don't do this for your first session unless you happen to have extra copies. It's quite a big financial commitment. Rather, if your group decides that they like Trail of Cthulhu and they want to keep playing it pretty regularly, then you can buy more. But again, hopefully some of your players will buy their own. The next section here is other optional things as well. But the first one I would say is probably important to have. Which is handouts. So there are a few already in the Midnight Sabrosa book, so you should print them out, have them ready to hand over to your players. You can also create your own if you want extra clues to have handouts or maps or anything like that. And actually, in the Discord group, one of the members shared a great map upgrade. So this is the one that comes in the book, the map of the house, and this is the one created by the Discord group member. If you want to join, there's a link in the description. There's a link to the New Game Master Month, and on their website you can find the link to the Discord. I think it's at the bottom of every page as well. Right here. Just click on that and you can join Discord. And the guy is offering it just for free. It's already there in the Trail of Cthulhu section, so just download it and use it if you want. So you can also get a GM screen too. If you're running Trail of Cthulhu, it's called a keeper screen. It's actually very hard to get a hold of the physical copy, but you can still get the PDF from the Pelgrane Press website or from Drive-Thru RPG. They don't show exactly what's on the screen, but rather it's a screen pack, and it also comes with a booklet of advice. I did manage to find one physical one, which is a reasonable price. It's not on Amazon. There's one on Amazon Japan for about the equivalent of about $600 or $700. Don't buy that one. But if you go to Noble Knight Games, you can find one last copy there. So first person there gets it, I guess. But I couldn't find the physical one anywhere else at a reasonable price. Another thing you could have is a vinyl mat and some wet erase markers. I did use this a little bit during a D&D campaign before the pandemic, but since then I haven't used it. Similarly, I don't really like using miniatures anymore. I prefer theater of the mind, which is where you and the players imagine everything. I think that it has fewer distractions and uses the players' imaginations more. And that's always the rule with horror. As soon as you show someone the horror, it becomes less scary. So, for example, if you've got a ghoul miniature, it's less horrifying than your description and your players' imaginations. The second last thing is tokens, and you really don't need them for Trail of Cthulhu. As I mentioned before, giving extra physical things to the players will generally distract them from the game. Some games like Conan 2D20 or Octon Cthulhu 2D20 need tokens to keep track of things like momentum. But Trail of Cthulhu doesn't need anything like this, so I would skip this. Unless you have a great idea yourself. And the final thing here is other game accessories. You don't need any extra source books, but you could, if you wanted, it's not necessary, have a read of the ghoul entry in Hideous Creatures. Also see the 2 articles below, which are good to read through in advance, but you don't need to have them physically with you during the game. So now we're going to move on to the reading for this entry and the 2 extra articles that I just mentioned. The first is the Enchiridion of Elucidation, and the second is just general tips on running Gumshoe. So just before reading this, I'm just going to mention all of the great resources that you can find. If you go to pelgrainpress.com/trail-of-Cthulhu/, you come to this. It's a great picture as well, and if you watch it long enough, you'll see lots of odd things going on in the house or around the house as well. So we've got anyway, I won't spoil that. But if you scroll down, you can get information about it, articles about it, the products, and the resources. The resources is an excellent selection here, and it's separated out into different things that you might want. So, for example, first-time GMs and player resources. This has the Enchiridion, which we're going to look at. It also has information on creating an investigator. I think that'll be useful in our next session, and just pages of resources. But you can kind of, browse through this as well yourself. So, on to the Enchiridion. There is a lot of great information here, but it's not all useful for the first-time keeper. So I'm going to give you an overview of it, and you can read through it in more detail if you want, but there is no need either. The supplement calls itself, just down here, a pamphlet of useful analysis, advice, and additions to the Trail of Cthulhu rule set. We start off with the core mechanics of investigative abilities, and they say in a TV show, if there was a chemical spill and a sample from that was sent to a lab, but the results came back inconclusive, and that was the end of the episode, it would be terrible. So Trail of Cthulhu really wants those core clues not to be missable. If you're there and you have the appropriate skill, you get the clue. There's no dice rolling there. So there's 3 ways the players can get information from the chemical spill, for example. The first thing is when they find the chemical spill, they can use an appropriate investigative ability, such as chemistry. They don't need to spend points, they just say what they're doing. If they have the investigative ability, they will get the clue. In this example, they find out, for example, that there are only 2 factories that make this stuff. So these core clues with no spends will always open more paths to investigation for the players. Second is if they want more information, they can spend some of their pool points. These are called non-core clues. They're not needed to solve the case, but they can give more background or information or hints. In this example, they could spend 1 pool point from chemistry to find out that the chemical is used for making bombs. If they spend another pool point of chemistry, they might get some information on previous cases involving this chemical. Or a streetwise spend might let them learn which local criminals use this chemical. And the third way to use their investigative ability is called a benefit. It doesn't give a lead or extra information, but it provides something else useful. The player describes what they want to happen and offers a certain number of pool points. The keeper should usually allow the benefit, although they might alter the number of pool points it costs or the specifics of the benefit. Only reject it if it would cause serious problems with the scenario continuing, or if it's kind of incredibly overpowered. Keepers can also offer benefits to the players, and I think this is good for your first game where the players might be unsure about how to go about asking for one. But once they've experienced that a few times over a number of games, then they'll start coming up with their own suggestions as well. So in this chemical spill example, a benefit might mean being able to prove their credentials to get a job in one of the factories, or they might be able to bulk order some of the chemicals or something like that. And the last point just to keep in mind is anytime players spend pool points for a benefit, it should be something good, not dull or useless. Next, when you're playing, especially at the start with new players, the players will likely want to keep all of their pool points, because they're useful. Remind the players that pool points are there to be used and their ability ratings will be unchanged. You use your pool points to allow you to succeed at different things. And this last paragraph here is great, and I would say even read it to your players. Investigators get X chances to shine per adventure, where X is a somewhat fuzzy and unpredictable number. But unless players spend their pool points, the likelihood of success and standout story moments for their investigators diminishes. So here we just go over the basic idea we've already discussed both in this video and previous videos. To get the core clue, get your investigator to the scene, have the right investigative ability, and tell the keeper you're using that ability. Then they will definitely get the clue. It does not depend on a dice roll. So there are some examples here of how the players could state their intention. But I personally prefer when the players describe what they're doing without reference to the mechanics to try to keep the immersion. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in this as it comes up in the Enchiridion. But just a last point there as well is, especially with beginner players, if you're using where the players declare the stat that they're using, always, and even if you're using it the different way, my way, always feel free to suggest to players, especially beginner players, do you want to use your architecture ability? But as the players get more experienced, I would say suggest this less and less. But it's definitely useful at the start to learn how the game works. So next we have just a short section about defeating opponents. And this is very similar to Numenera, so if you've watched those videos, you might know what it's like. Once opponents reach 0 health pool points, they are defeated. But this can mean death, unconsciousness, surrender, capture, or anything else that makes sense based on the action of the players up until that point. So just do your best to think about what's the most logical manifestation of 0 health pool points in this situation. Okay, the next section is excellent reading in preparation for your Midnight Sub Rosa game. I recommend reading through this yourself, but I will give you the key points here, and this will show you how to use combat with a ghoul as the enemy, which is perfect for our Midnight Sub Rosa game. Okay, so we're going to look at a sample combat here. We have 1 ghoul versus 3 investigators with guns. So let's look at the information. First, we'll look at the characters. We have Tag Hunter, who has health 13, firearms 10, weapons 8, scuffling 2, and no rating in first aid. He has a Remington M32 double-barrel shotgun, +1, or +2 when used point blank, +1 when both barrels are fired simultaneously, and a machete. His hit threshold is 4 because his athletics is 8 or greater. Next we have Annabelle Swift, who has a health of 10, firearms of 8, weapons 4, scuffling 6, and again no rating in first aid. She has a weapon, twin Colt revolvers with +0. You can use 2 revolvers simultaneously in a pulp game if your firearm rating is 5 or greater. And she also has a hat pin, which is at -1. Her hit threshold is 3. We also have Professor Oberon Lankwiler, who has health 5, no rating in firearms, no rating in weapons, scuffling 4, and first aid 1. He has a weapon, a Webley revolver of a +0, and his hit threshold is 3. Finally, we have the Ghoul. The Ghoul has health 7, no ratings in firearms, no ratings in weapons, and scuffling 9. For a weapon, he has 2 claws at +1 and a bite of +0. And it says 2 bites in a row means it latches on for double damage, that you can see on page 133 of the rulebooks. It has an armor bonus. It only suffers half damage from firearms and projectiles. And its hit threshold is 4 or 5 when it's underground. So, setting the scene, the investigators are cautiously exploring a tunnel which runs under the Arkham Municipal Burial Ground. They disturb a ghoul which is sucking the marrow from some cracked bones, partially concealed beneath a stone slab. They must all make a 4-point stability test when they see the ghoul, and that's under "you see a supernatural creature up close." After stability rolls, there is the combat. So the order of action is determined at the beginning of combat just once, according to the character's ability ratings in their chosen method of combat. This gives us, first will be Tag, who has a 10 in firearms. Next will be the Ghoul, which has a 9 in scuffling. Next, Annabelle, who has a 4 in weapons. And the Professor, who has a 0 in firearms. Having no firearms rating, the Professor has decided in advance of the combat what to do. He chooses shoot the Ghoul. So, round 1. Tag goes first. He gives the Ghoul both barrels at point blank range. The Ghoul has partial cover, so that's a 0 modifier to hit threshold against only firearm attacks. So the Ghoul has a current hit threshold of 5 because it's underground. Tag spends 4 pool points from his firearms ability to ensure a hit. He rolls a 2 for damage and +4 for the double barrel shotgun fired at point blank range. But the 6 total is halved to 3 because of the Ghoul's armor bonus rule of half damage from firearms. The Ghoul's health tumbles down 3 from 7 to 4. Tag has 6 firearm pool points left. Up next is the Ghoul. It launches itself at Tag and makes 3 consecutive attacks. The Keeper spends 2 pool points from scuffling on the first claw attack and rolls a 3, making 5 from the 2 pool points, which is a hit versus Tag's hit threshold of 4. The Keeper rolls 3 for damage, which becomes 4 with the +1 claw bonus. Tag is now on 9 health. The Keeper spends 2 scuffling pool points on the second claw attack and rolls 5, another hit. He rolls 4 for damage, which becomes 5 with the +1 claw bonus. Tag's health is now 4. Then it's a bite. A 2 pool point scuffling spend gives a success with a roll of 2, and the Keeper rolls 5 damage with no modifier for the bite attack this time. Tag's health is now -1, so he is hurt. In theory, Tag must make a consciousness test, but the difficulty is 1, which is an automatic success. The Ghoul's scuffling is now down to 3. Up next is Annabelle. She wants to distract the creature from its feast, so she jabs it with her hat pin, spending all of her 4 weapons pool points to ensure a hit against the Ghoul's hit threshold of 5. She rolls a 2 for the damage roll, causing 1 point of damage due to the -1 hatpin modifier. The ghoul now has 3 health pool points left. Annabelle has no weapons pool points left, but has not spent any firearms pool points. Finally, we have the Professor. He closes his eyes and squeezes the trigger of the unfamiliar Webley. He has no firearms rating and unfortunately rolls a 1. The Keeper decides that he shoots himself in the foot. He rolls a 3 for damage, but this is modified by -2 because of his unfamiliarity with firearms, giving a final damage result of -1. The Professor now has 4 health pool points remaining. In the second round, we start with Tag. He frantically wrestles with the ghoul, trying to hold its festering mouth away from his face. That's scuffling. So even though he's changing from firearm to scuffling, we don't change the order of the round. It's the same as it was at the very start. So he spends all his remaining 2 scuffling pool points on his roll. The difficulty is the ghoul's hit threshold, 5, +1 because Tag is hurt. He needs a 6. He rolls a 2 plus the 2 from his scuffling pool points, gives a 4, which is not enough. It's not looking good for Tag. Up next is the ghoul. The Keeper decides to spend 2 scuffling pool points on a ghoul claw attack roll to finish off Tag. He rolls a 1, making a total of 3, and this is a miss against Tag's hit threshold of 4. The ghoul spends 0 scuffling pool points on the next claw attack, and again gets a 1, another miss. Maybe Tag will make it after all. The Keeper spends the ghoul's final 1 scuffling pool point on the bite attack and rolls a 6. Since this is the second successive bite attack, it does double damage. The Keeper rolls a 3 for a total of 6. The thing about double damage is you can find that information on page 133 under the ghoul section. So Tag's health tumbles to -7. He is now seriously wounded and must make another consciousness test. To stand a chance of passing, he must use at least 1 health pool point, and even then he would have to roll a 6. He decides not to do that, so Tag automatically fails the roll and falls into merciful oblivion. He is seriously wounded and requires first aid to stabilize his wounds, and, if he survives, hospitalization to recover. Up next is Annabelle. She opts to fire both pistols at the creature. She must spend 1 firearms pool point just to do this. She spends another 3 points on each test roll. Since they are simultaneously, you need to decide both amounts before rolling any dice. So that gives a total firearm spend of 1 to shoot 2 shots, and then 3 for the first one and 3 for the second one. You don't have to spend the same amount on both of them, but that's a total firearm spend of 7, and Annabelle rolls a 6 and a 2. So with the +3 bonus to each, both shots are successful against the ghoul's hit threshold of 5. She rolls 3 and 1 for the damage, and both are independent, and therefore both of them are independently halved and rounded up, then added together, which gives 2 + 1 for 3 damage. The ghoul only had 3 pool points of health left, so the Keeper decides it is dead. Remember, a Keeper chooses how a creature with 0 health pool points is defeated. Annabelle only has 1 firearms pool point left. Hopefully nothing else nasty is waiting in the wings down here. Finally, the Professor tries to stabilize Tag. He must make a successful first aid test against a difficulty 3. The Professor has only 1 pool point of first aid and uses that, so must roll a 2 or better. If the investigators can stabilize Tag and get him out of the crypt, he will need to spend 7 days in hospital recuperating. So the next section here lists a lot of drives that have appeared in supplementary publications and on the internet as well. I would say ignore these for the moment for your first game. it's much more simple to stick with the basics the first time you play it through. These drives aren't more complicated, but just giving your players too many options at the start will slow down character creation if you're creating new players. But these drives are great, so definitely do come back here after your first game or two. There are two optional rules here as well. Let me just skip ahead. For rolling. So normally when you're rolling, you get to add as many pool points as you want, and it will, you might even guarantee success. I would say stick with that basic rule for your first game, and if you want to add this in later, that'll be fine. But the two options I give you here are version 1, which is where anytime a roll of 1 happens, it is a failure, regardless of how many points were spent or how easy the test was. If you roll a 1, it's always going to be a failure. Option 2, you can only get a bonus of up to +2 from your pool points. All other points you spend just give you an additional roll. So if you spend 4 pool points on a task, you would get a +2 modifier to your roll, taking 2 of those, and the remaining 2 points will give you 2 additional rolls. So you would roll 3 times your base one plus the additional 2, and then choose your best die roll of those 3 and add +2 to that result. So the tables here show the percentage. This is the percentage with the standard way of doing it. What's the chance of success? If they spend 7 pool points and the difficulty is 8, they will definitely succeed. If they spend 3 pool points and the difficulty is 6, they have a 2 and 3 chance of succeeding. But this new method, where you can get a maximum +2 bonus, but you can get multiple rolls, changes it quite dramatically as well. And apart from difficulty 2 and 3 tests, there's no way of guaranteeing success. And again, I would avoid these in your first game, but if you want to change it up a little bit later, come back. We get additional optional rules for having a high ability score. For example, if you have an 8 or higher in athletics, your rating, if it's higher, your hit threshold goes up by 1. You're very athletic, so it makes you more difficult for someone to hit you. But your other abilities don't give any benefit, don't get any benefit from being over 8. In other gumshoe games, like Night's Black Agents, you do get benefits from all general abilities whose rating is over 8. So here is a list of benefits that you can apply in Call of Cthulhu, or in Trail of Cthulhu. Again, I would say leave this out for the moment. If you are using pre-gens, which are at the end of Midnight Sub Rosa, then there's no character creation, so you don't need these. But if you're making your own characters, these extra options will be confusing and just slow down decisions. But I'll just give you, just read a couple of them for you so you know what it's like. So driving. So if you have 8 or higher rating in driving, you get this advantage of drive by shootout. You're adept at lining up shots for your passengers when they're shooting out the window. You may transfer up to 4 of your driving pool points to your passengers' firearms pool at the start of a car chase. Unspent points are lost when the car chase ends. Okay, another example will be firearms. Nerves of steel. Difficulty numbers for your firearms test aren't affected by you being shaken, so low stability. And just one last one. I'll read maybe the last one. Great. Weapons. Your favorite weapon. Pick your favorite melee weapon. You draw strength and courage from its familiar heft in your hand. Once per adventure, you may gain 4 stability from drawing or brandishing your weapon. With this sword, or whatever other weapon, by your side, there's nothing you can't handle. So you can see that that's really cool and can add a lot to the game, but you can probably see why it would make it difficult for players to allocate points. There's too much to choose from. Oh, but I want to get this extra bonus here. Oh, but I want to get this. I would say only introduce these extra rules to your players after they have created a few characters and they're feeling familiar with the basic process. Another house rule here introduces the correspondence ability. Basically, you can spend 1 pool point from correspondence, which is your new skill, to create a new NPC correspondent. So you know just the guy for the job. You can give them then 2 pool points in any investigative abilities. So you would spend 1 correspondent pool point to have a contact who is, for example, a forensic analyst. And then that forensic analyst, you are creating them, you get to put 2 points in forensics, for example, or 1 in forensics and 1 in something else, or 2 in anything you want, really. This can help you get core clues from an ability that you don't have. So maybe no one in your party has this investigative ability, but now you know someone who has that, and then you can get it. And they also give a few additional things that you can do with correspondence points, such as sending all of your notes or retroactively saying, as you're dying, it's a good thing I sent all those notes or my diary to my correspondent just before I die, basically. So that way your correspondent could maybe be your next character. And again, this is a very nice rule, but it's not necessary for your first game. The last house rule here is about outdoor hiking. I personally leave this out. Trail of Cthulhu is rules light, and encumbrance rules or outdoor hiking rules and distance like that tend to slow things down. It's just an extra mechanic. And we certainly don't need it for Midnight Sabrosa, so I won't discuss it here. But if you're interested, yeah, please check it out. So now we get on to advice for keepers, and this is really useful to come back to if you ever feel confused throughout your time running Trail of Cthulhu. First, we get a breakdown of the different kinds of clues. For core clues, you have to have a certain investigative ability, be in the right place, and say you're using that ability. You don't spend any pool points, but you do have to have a non-zero rating in it. You could have a 0 pool point in it, is fine. The next one, 0 point clues are very similar, but the only difference really is that these clues are more about evoking atmosphere rather than important leads. Point spend clues are non-core clues, because you never have to spend for core clues. But point spend clues are non-core clues where the player has to spend 1 or more pool points to get that extra information. Inconspicuous clues require a non-zero rating in an ability, but you don't have to state that you're using it. If you're present and you have the skill, you will find it. It's so obvious or something like that. And symbol search clues are when the players say that they're searching somewhere and no pool points are spent. An example given here is if you're searching a room and you find an envelope taped under the table. If you say that you're searching the room, you'll find it because it's not behind a locked door or in a hidden compartment or anything. It's just there. So there is a quick thought process here as well about creating your own clues, but we don't need that for our first scenario, so I don't want to overload you there. After that, there's a bit of discussion about knowing which type a certain clue should be. And again, just use your best judgment. You can read more here, but you will figure out what works best for you and your group as you play it. Don't worry about making any mistakes. So the following section describes how I like to play, where mechanics are mostly kept in the background. The players don't say, I'm using assess honesty. There are 2 examples here that I want to point out. So the first one, player, does he seem to be lying? Keeper, looks at the investigative ability worksheet, sees that the player character has assess honesty, and answers. His eyes dart wildly as he speaks. So yeah, you get the feeling he's trying to put one over on you. The other example here, which is one that I really like. Player, I asked the old geezer sitting by the wall whether he's seen anything suspicious. Keeper, in character, playing him as anxious, craning his neck around to see who's watching. You, don't seem to be from around these parts, young fella. Why should I talk to you? Player. Listen, you old bag of bones. I ain't got the patience for any nonsense from you. Cough up what you know or you'll wish you had. And so the point here is that you don't need to ask whether the player is using intimidation, because he's doing what any good role player does, showing instead of telling. So this is really why I like to play like this. Rather than say I use intimidate, they describe what they're doing, and then I can associate that with the most relevant clue. So the players focus less on the rules. Of course, the keeper has a pretty good knowledge of the rules, but the players focus on the role playing, and then I'll assess what they're doing. It's just more immersive, in my opinion. For this approach, you just need to quickly fill out this matrix of the player characters and their skills, so you can easily keep track of who has what skills. Just make a list of this during character creation, and then you can easily see what they have. So the following rule, the next one down, is an optional rule, and it does involve more immersion, but I think it's just a bit too clunky for the players. I don't use this, and I just tell the players if there's a point spend available. So in this one, this optional rule, they basically, the keeper will just keep a track of who has a certain number of, who has the highest ranking of pool points in an investigative ability, and give them extra information as it comes up. I like to give the players the option of whether they want to spend pool points to get a little bit extra there as well. That kind of gives them a little bit more autonomy in deciding what is happening in the game. But if you like the sound of that, I think, yeah, go for it. I find it a little bit clunky to play like that, but maybe you'll be better than me. So now we're going to get to, there's a long kind of explanation over there, but now we get to some very useful Q&A. And some of these questions probably you're already asking yourself. So let's go through them. What if the players come up with a different way to get the information than the scenario specifies? Let them. As long as it makes sense and doesn't push other players out of the spotlight, definitely do it. Remember, you want to let kind of every player shine throughout the game. So don't just have one player steamrolling it. Let all the players have their time to, have the big moment as well. The second thing is, what if the player's actions suggest a clue that isn't in the written scenario? And you should use your knowledge of the scenario and think about the most logical solution. Just don't contradict very important story points. And also you should understand that if you do kind of improvise a new clue, which is fine and it's good, just understand that this may lead to new scenes that you haven't prepared for, that you'll also have to improvise those scenes. But allowing player creativity is great. How hard should I hint if the players are floundering? Every situation is different. You have to judge it based on your players and how the game is flowing. If they're having fun, it's probably fine. But if it seems like they're getting in any way frustrated, just step in. But you can also try to disguise your hinting too. So use the investigative ability worksheet, which we just saw, to kind of tie the hint to a skill. So here are 3 examples for accounting, architecture, and interrogation. So rather than just, being totally out of game, you give them this hint to kind of nudge them in the right direction. Suddenly, you remember the phrase your forensic accounting professor kept hammering into you. Follow the money. Or, maybe it's the engineer in you, but you can't help thinking there's something about that schematic you missed the first time around. Or, it occurs to you that maybe it's time to take somebody into custody and ask a few tough questions. What are some common causes of player floundering? Some of them are someone already had the right answer, but it was dismissed. In that case, just tell them, maybe you've already thought about the right answer, but you dismissed it. Another one is the group could be stuck in speculation. They probably need more information. So just remind them, maybe you want to investigate a little bit more. Maybe you don't have all the clues. The last one is, it can be a little bit of a problem, especially with people new to horror games. The group knows what to do, but they're too risk averse. In this case, remind them that they are playing a horror game, and there's a bit of a social contract there that you'll take some risks. But also you can use their drives to kind of encourage them to take the risks. They can try and resist that, but that's going to be, mentally scarring for them. So maybe it's better if they just go for it as well. What if the investigators over-investigate every little detail? Yeah, of course that can happen. But instead of just telling them, oh, don't worry about that, it's not relevant, great advice here is describe what they're investigating while also showing it's not connected to the case. This reaffirms that the investigator is very competent in that skill, but this is not something to focus on for this scenario. So the examples are, the image depicts an idealized image of Henry VIII. Exactly what you'd expect from someone who didn't bother to research the actual period. So again, this is kind of saying, yeah, it's just, like, it's not an important one. It's just something you'd expect. It's made of synthetic fibers. It can't be an antique. So it's just like, yeah, this is just fake. Or modern anyway. It's not something important to look into. You can recall scores of star systems from memory and can say right away that this pattern is just an arbitrary design chosen by the artist. So again, just saying, yeah, you know very well, but this is just random. It's not important. That is much better role-playing than just saying, no, don't worry about that. That's not relevant. Because then it kind of means everything you're describing must be relevant. There's a section here for investigative spends, giving you some nice ideas. But I will skip it for now as you don't need it for Midnight Subrosa. But yeah, do come back and check it out after you've done it. The next section here is about lying and red herrings. In Trail of Cthulhu, rules is written, if the players use assess honesty, then they get a sense from how the NPC is behaving. They won't know what the truth is, if the other person is lying, but they might know that it's a lie. When they use assess honesty, they will get one of three answers. 1, he's lying. The investigator now knows this, but can't prove it. And it also doesn't compel the subject to reveal the truth. And the investigator doesn't know the truth unless they can kind of infer from, was it a yes or no question? If they said yes, then the answer is obviously no. The second answer they could get is, you got no reading from this and you can't tell for sure. Maybe they're a little bit holding back on the truth, or maybe they're just nervous from something else. And the third one is, he's telling the truth. So in general role-playing games, I don't like there just to be a truth or a lie thing. Because, you can't tell that in person really as well. But for Trail of Cthulhu, I do think it's very good and important to have this kind of like relatively clear one. Again, if it's something important, then no reading is fine. But in general, it's good because it's a very investigative game. And the goal of this is to give lots of clues to the players. You're not telling the players what the truth is, just that this person is lying. And they can use that information just to kind of go on. For red herrings, this is an investigative game with a lot of clues. You don't really want dead ends or boring red herrings. They're not satisfying. If you do have red herrings, give them a purpose in your story. So the PDF here does go into more detail and gives a description of a good ticking red herring. I don't think that you need this for Midnight Subrosa. But it is good just to be aware of the basics. Try to avoid those red herrings. But There's a good example here if you want to read it afterwards or now if you've got the time. Similarly to that, there is also a nice section on the bargaining skills and NPCs reneging on deals. Again, I would avoid using this in your introductory game. If they use the bargaining skill, then have the NPC, as long as, they're on the same side, then have the NPC honor the deal. But it is a very interesting read after you've run a game or two of Trail of Cthulhu. So this document ends with some clarifications about 0 combat damage. So if your attack modifier brings you down to 0, so we spoke about that during the combat. Did we do a combat round? Anyway, in one of the previous videos, where if you hit with a fist, then you roll your die. Oh, it was a 1, but your fist modifier is -2. So now I'm doing, -1 damage, which is 0, because you're never going to heal them. But I told you before, personally for me, I like that any successful hit will do at least 1 damage. So there's just a few extra rules here as well if you want. So Pulp is minimum 1 damage. Purist is minimum 0 damage. But you can kind of do whatever you want, really. The reason for Purist is just kind of giving you that real sense of helplessness. And the next part is a little section on consciousness tests. I'm not sure if we've gone through that in our course yet, but we'll just do a very quick review of it then. NPCs are defeated when their health pool reaches 0. For players, if they are between 0 and -5, they are hurt. Whenever they enter this state of hurt from positive health, there will be a consciousness test. If they go from hurt to seriously wounded, which is -6 to -11, then there will be another consciousness test. But staying within the hurt range, so I'm hurt at -1 and I go to -4, I'm still within that hurt range. Moving within this does not trigger another consciousness test. Similarly, in the seriously wounded section, moving within this doesn't require it. It's only going from healthy to hurt, going from hurt to seriously wounded, and after that you'll be dead. The only exception is when an attacker declares a non-lethal damage attack, but you can probably ignore this exception for the moment. When you are controlling NPCs or creatures and you don't know how much of their pool points to spend when attacking, you can use something called attack patterns. So it's basically predetermined how many points they will spend on each attack. So this cultist with a scuffling 8 might have an attack pattern of +3, +3, +2, and then they've used all of their pool points. When you're doing this, you should think about the NPC, their background, and the story logic to determine how cautious or angry or fearful or other emotions they are in relation to your players. And that is it. That is the end of the Enchiridion. It's about 30 pages of content, but we get a huge amount of useful information and clarifications there. Don't forget to come back and read this later in your journey as a keeper. It's good to come back to it multiple times as well. Every time I come back, I find new points or kind of gives me new ideas going forward. For now, let's move on to the second reading assignment for this week, which is the website with tips for playing gumshoe games in general. So you can also use it for games like Night's Black Agents. It's much shorter and just general advice, so we can breeze through it. When running a game, read the adventure and get the structure of it. That's the most important thing first. Then there's a list of suggestions how to give the players a sense of freedom so that they don't think it's just a linear story. The first one, if the players are having fun, they won't focus on any linearity of the narrative. So generally, let them enjoy their creative ideas. Don't be saying no to everything unless it's kind of game-breaking or nonsensical. Expect that you will have to improvise scenes and reactions. This is true in every RPG. You can never be prepared for every eventuality. You can insert improvised clues to help bring the players back on track to the main plot if they're starting to go off. The suggested abilities for core clues are just suggestions. So you might find out, core clue can be found out with forensics. But this is just a suggestion. If the players come up with a good idea that makes sense, let them use it. You can change the way in which players get a clue. For example, a clue normally found through forensics or research might instead be found by using an interpersonal skill talking to the librarian or the forensic scientist. If no character in the scene has the right ability, you can use floating pool points to assign an ability. Floating pool points are unassigned pool points which are assigned during the game as needed. If you want to find out a little bit more about this, it's just a very short passage. It's mentioned on page 203 of the core rulebook, just in the top corner there. But basically, the role-playing is at the heart of the game of all gumshoe games, but Trail of Cthulhu in this case. The big kind of mechanical part of the game is clues. Sometimes people will forget about all of the clues that they have. So here are some tips to help keep everything flowing smoothly. The GM can always feel free to summarize the known clues from time to time, and the players will be like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Maybe we should follow this lead or something. In general, as I mentioned before, let the players keep planning as long as they're having fun. Only interrupt them when they're getting bogged down. Solving the mystery might seem easy to you as the keeper because you know the answer. The players, however, don't. So be generous with explanations and extra information or clues if the players get stuck. If the players won't leave a scene, you can just let them know that they've got all the relevant information and maybe it's time to move on. And when you're offering benefits to the players, let them know what they will get from it, but also encourage them to suggest their own benefits. Let their creativity be a part of the story. And finally, for combat, remember, and I say this in every game that I play, every RPG, this is not a GM, or in this case a keeper, versus a player, or versus the players. You don't want to just destroy the players instantly and win. In combat, don't just spend enough points to guarantee a hit on the players, although there are a few certain exceptions where you might use that. Let the dice play a role in determining what happens. In a horror game like this, it's absolutely okay if the players die or go insane, but you do want it to have been an interesting and dramatic experience. So one of the exceptions here is that a super powerful mythos foe might just destroy you in an instant. Usually you'll only come up against them at kind of the conclusion, and they will have gone through the whole game, and that can be a satisfying ending as well. Even if they, might not be so happy to have been one-shotted, that's a logical one part of the horror game. And there we have it. We've now finished the penultimate preparation session for our big game. The last session, is already out, and we're going to be learning about character creation. I'll be sharing that video, hopefully, this weekend. But that is all for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.